आओ लोगों के यही नूर खुदा पाओगे।
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to our series Essence of Islam. In the society we live today, religion is being attacked from all sides. And Islam in particular, there are many allegations raised against the various teachings of Islam. People do not understand the true teachings of Islam. The religion of Islam, as explained by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, has been forgotten by the Muslims themselves. The latter-day Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani alayhi Islam, brought the true teachings of Islam to the forefront once again. In this series of compilation, it is called The Essence of Islam. There are 5 volumes, and the extracts from the writings of the promised Messiah Islam have been gathered under various topics. We have been discussing different topics, and today we will be discussing the topic of marriage and righteous progeny. In the studio with me, we have 2 of my colleagues, Rizwan Shahrukh Abid Sahib and Rizwan Mohammad Sahib. Rizwan Sahib, let's start with you. Today when we look at our society, generally speaking, people are moving away from the institution of marriage. And those who do tend to get married, it is at a much older age compared to even if we go, let's say, 50 years back. And if they do get married, then there's the issue of divorce. The divorce rate is very high. And people generally say that, whatever the institution of marriage has to offer, we're enjoying our lives, so why tie ourselves down? So to these people, how do we answer them? What do we say to them, that why do we need to get married?
So that's a really good question. The promised Messiah al-Islam, he has mentioned in his book Chashma-e-Marfat, which is also from The Essence of Islam, Volume 3, and he has mentioned the different purposes of marriage. The first purpose which he has mentioned is that so through the system of marriage, there be a progeny, there be an offspring that would remember God. So when we look at this, we see that this is in line with the teachings of the Holy Quran as well, where we find that Allah Ta'ala says that وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created the jinn and the men except so that they may worship me. So we see that our very purpose of creation is for the remembrance and worship of Allah Ta'ala. Secondly, the Prophet Messiah Islam, he has mentioned that physically as well, there is a protection between the husband and the wife. The husband is a shield for the wife, and the wife is a shield for the husband. So that protection is from illicit desires, from illicit relationships, from lustful inclinations. So this physical protection is also there, and both act as a shield for one another. Thirdly, we find that not only physically but mentally and psychologically as well, both the husband and wife, they are a source or a means of support for one another. So through trials and tribulations, to protect each other from depression, loneliness. So all these things, they are part of that system of marriage which is mentioned in Islam.
And I think it's very important, especially the point you mentioned in the beginning, that you get progeny, which is righteous progeny. And the big benefit, in my opinion, from this is, and the promised Messiah ﷺ, he's also highlighted this fact, that when you're having children through the institution of marriage, those children are able to have a guardianship over them, which look after their different needs. Because what happens is that, especially the society we're living in today, where people are having a relationship outside of the institution of marriage, there are a lot of children which are being brought up by single parents. And as a result of that, it's a vicious cycle that when they grow up, they're unable to learn from both the father and the parent and the mother, because only one parent is there in that household, and then that cycle continues. So, Islam mentioning this, and the promised Messiah ﷺ highlighting this fact, that through the institution of marriage, the couple, they're having their own security, and at the same time, we're also securing our future generations. There is a proper system of their upbringing. But Shahrukh Sahib, having said that, if we are to get married, it's not a commitment that is for one day or for a week or a month or even a year. You know, people, for example, even if they want to buy a car, or even let's say something as small as picking up a cell phone, you know, people compare the odds, people compare the pros and cons, and then after that, they understand that this is going to be a commitment. So, you know, I need to think through. So when it comes to marriage, how should we select our spouse? I mean, it's not something that we can take lightly. So somebody who has this question that, okay, he says, I accept the institution of marriage, but how do I choose my spouse? So how would we respond to them?
So Mansab, you know, unfortunately, a lot of cultures, they enforce arranged marriages on couples, and couples are, they're wed without their consent. But Islam's a religion that has allowed a girl and a boy, to choose their spouse and their partner.
Think, I want this point to be understood, because many people, they have this same allegation and they raise it against Islam, that Islam is also one of those religions that forces, arranged marriage, so to speak.
When we see the life of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that, there were instances where, there were, girls or guys that would, speak their mind and say, we want to marry such and such a person, and the Holy Prophet would allow it. And so, this is something which Islam does allow, for the girl and the guy, to pick their spouse. Obviously, the main thing is that, when we're looking for a spouse, we should pray. And when we see a prospect, or, the first thing we should see is if that person is righteous or not. And this is exactly what the Holy Prophet ﷺ said as well, that the first thing, which is everlasting and which goes on for a very, very long time, is spirituality, piety, and character. Everything else fades away. And the promised Messiah ﷺ also said the same thing, that the basis of finding a prospect should be spirituality and piety and character, and everything else is extra. And because of this very reason that beauty fades away, right? But these things don't. So and then one time someone had asked the question about compatibility, because compatibility is also very important. And the promised Messiah ﷺ has said that compatibility is important, but it's not mandatory. So if you do find someone compatible, that's very good, and you should pursue that prospect. But in case if you don't find anyone, then it's not mandatory as such. So to find a spouse, the main thing has to be piety, because that is something that goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think that is the main issue that our society today is facing. That as we mentioned in the beginning, that people are moving away from religion. Religion is not a priority. So the byproduct of that is that righteousness is not a priority, right? And the main thing nowadays is, especially the society we're living is the physical attractiveness. And what happens is that you have a lot of these apps, you have a lot of these other websites where dating, it starts with looking at the picture, right? So according to the Islamic teachings, right away you're starting with the wrong concept, because you're looking at that attractiveness. And as you mentioned, that that is sooner or later is going to fade away. And then once you get into that cycle, then it's always there that, okay, can I find something better? Or if you look at somebody more attractive, then obviously you would have those thoughts, and you might want to finish this relationship and move on. But now, so we understand the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he gave us a criteria that the main thing should be righteousness. It should be the piety of the person. Having selected a spouse, we get into a relationship. Rizwan Sahib, what would our responsibilities towards each other be? How should our treatment according to the teachings of Islam towards each other be? Because this is again something that many people say, that Islam gives too much power to the man, and the woman has no say whatsoever in the household. So how would we address this issue?
So we can see that Islam, it gives about different roles in the marriage. So we find that within Islam, the man, he is the benefactor, he is the one who is responsible for taking care of the wife and the children. So even if the wife goes out and she works, she has a job, she has an income, she does not have to come home and spend that money on the husband or the children. That money is hers. She can choose where she wants to spend that money. So, but on the other hand, when we look at the husband, we can see that he is responsible for spending that money on his family, on his wife, on his children. So we can see that he has that responsible role of taking care of the wife and taking care of the family. But the wife, she is free to spend her money as she likes. And even we can see that whatever money that the husband gives in the marriage, whatever jewelry that he gives, anything that he gives to the wife, even at the time of the divorce, he cannot take that money back. He cannot give that jewelry back. When we look at how the spouse should be, the treatment of the spouse, we find the examples of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the example of the promised Messiah ﷺ as well. And the promised Messiah ﷺ, he has mentioned in the Chashma Marfat that all weaknesses and behavior of the woman should be tolerated by the husband. And that's except for indecency. And he says that it's very shameful that a man should fight with the woman. So we can see the example of the promised Messiah ﷺ. He has also mentioned that in this book, that once he raised his voice against his wife. So immediately he thought that I have done something wrong, something that I shouldn't have done. So he said he apologized, he sought forgiveness, he did istighfar, he gave some charity, and he offered some nawafil. So we can see the status of women and the respect that of women that has been given in Islam. And we can see even the example of the promised Messiah ﷺ, that even just simply raising his voice against his wife was something which was not tolerated by him as well.
And we also have the hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, where he said that khairukum khairukum li ahlihi, that the best amongst you is one who is best in regards to the treatment of his family and especially his spouse. And as you give that example, we find many such examples in the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the promised Messiah and the Khulafa, that how they always took good care of their spouse and their children. And from this example you mentioned of the promised Messiah, that just by raising his voice, he became so concerned, and it's mentioned that he did a lot of istighfar and he gave sadaqah, charity. So those people who are taking the teachings of Islam and twisting them and trying to use them in a way that whereby Islam is giving them certain extra power or something, they need to understand, they need to learn from the example of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the promised Messiah, that those were the men who best understood the teachings of Islam. And through their practice, we can best understand the teachings of Islam. And they never ever raised a hand against their spouse. And even in this example, that just raising his voice, and we do that all the time. Sometimes we get angry and there's shouting happening. But just that, imagine that. And unfortunately, there's people today, and Muslims today as well, who are not understanding the true teachings of Islam, who are not understanding the essence behind those teachings. And as a result of that, they're having those personal issues. And those issues which they're having, get blamed on the teachings of Islam, whereas the truth is totally the opposite. So we have been discussing today the concept of marriage and righteous progeny. We discussed why we need to get married, how we should be selecting our spouse. We'll be back after a short break.
When a hot-tempered person is provoked and punishes a child, he takes on the role of an enemy in the stress of his anger and imposes punishment far in excess of the wrong which has been done. An individual with self-respect and control over himself, who is also forbearing and dignified, has the right to correct a child to a certain extent as the occasion demands, or seek to guide the child. But a wrathful and hot-headed person who is easily provoked is not fit to be a guardian of children. I wish that instead of punishing children, parents would have recourse to prayer and should make it a habit to supplicate earnestly for their children, for the supplications of parents on behalf of their children meet with special acceptance.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back. We were discussing marriage and righteous progeny, and we were discussing the treatment of the spouses towards each other. And sometimes people don't fully understand that being nice to each other is different, and having a difference of opinion is totally different. So we find this, that even in the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he would have difference of opinion with his spouses. Same thing with the promised Messiah ﷺ. He would have a difference of opinion with his wife. So having a difference of opinion is okay. But the main thing to understand is, as Rizwan Sahib you were mentioning, is that we need to treat them well, our spouses, and we need to have that friendly relationship. I remember there's one hadith mentioned, one incident of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that once he was sitting with one spouse in the house of one spouse, and another wife, she sent some sweet. And this the house where he was at, that wife became angry that if the Holy Prophet ﷺ is here, why is this wife sending sweet food to, can I not cook for the Holy Prophet ﷺ? So she took, the burtan, the plate which the sweet was served in, and she threw it down and she broke it. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he obviously understood, sometimes we have that jealousy, sometimes we're human natures end of the day. So he said that, okay, just make sure you send a different plate back to the other wife, right? So, I mean, that is fine, having that relationship with our spouse where we have small fights. But end of the day, the religion of Islam tells us that, our spouse is our best friend, is somebody we can share our secrets with. And through that relationship, we can have we can achieve higher morality. Shahrukh Sahib, when that marriage is to take place, we've gone through the process of selecting our spouse, and now, the entire procedure of getting married, there are many rituals, ceremonies attached. And sometimes a lot of these rituals and ceremonies, they're cultural, they're not Islamic. So how do we differentiate between the two? What does Islam say about marriage, about the ceremonies or rituals that are permitted that we can have during our marriage process?
So when you look at what Islam permits, we see that, to sum it up, it would be nikah, rukhsati, and walima. So rukhsati does not have to be a proper function. It can be where the girl, she goes with her husband, to his house. And so this is what Islam has prescribed. But unfortunately, as time went on, cultures started to take over, and Muslims started to have big gatherings, and they spent a lot of money, and it became a competition. And so a lot of innovations were introduced. Wrong innovations were introduced within this ceremony of marriage as such. And where a lot of money was spent, and that becomes extravagant. And the Holy Quran, clearly says that those who are extravagant are brothers of Satan. So, the promised Messiah Islam has said that every Ahmadi should eradicate such evil customs. And, he said that, and I'll narrate a small story. Nawab Ali Khan Sahib, he was the son-in-law of the promised Messiah Islam. And he talks about how simple his marriage was and the rukhsati was with Nawab Mubarak Begum Sahiba. And he says that, after the nikah, I went to read namaz and I came back, and Amma Jan, she pointed towards my wife and said that, I'm leaving this orphan child with you. And she said, Assalamu alaikum, and left. And the woman, she went with me. So he explained how simple it was, right? And the promised Messiah has also said that, in Malfuzat, that yes, walima is important, but to spend money and to go out of your way and do all these things, that's un-Islamic. That's just a lot of money going to waste.
Yeah, and I mean, even Hazur, he has been drawing our attention towards this, that members of the Jamaat in particular, that when we're having these ceremonies, we need to be careful about the money we're spending. And Hazur has been mentioning that, for example, something as small as printing cards, people spend a lot of money, and so much that other families who are not that well off, they can have the entire ceremony with that amount. So end of the day, we have to see what the true teachings of Islam are, and what they're telling us, what that requirement is, as long as we're fulfilling that requirement. And from there, if we have the resources, yes, it can be a modest ceremony, but we should always remember that end of the day, we're following the teachings of the Holy Quran, the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and in this day and age, we have accepted the latter-day Messiah, and as such, we have a higher responsibility of following the true teachings of Islam.
When we see, when we study Islam, we see that more emphasis is laid on the married life instead of the actual wedding. but culture, sheds more light or emphasis or lays emphasis on having a grand wedding, but not so much in the actual marriage life. So these are two different things. But in Islam, more emphasis is laid on, to be good to each other. To not demand things as such. And going back to the point that Rizwan Saab was talking about, treatment of spouses, we see that one time, that a servant and who used to live in the house of the promised Messiah, Islam, she said that, Mirza Saab, he listens to his wife like all the time.
Yeah.
Whatever she says, goes. And I'll talk.
And I remember, I don't know the name of the companion, but I remember there's an incident that they were saying that Bahar bhi queen ka raja, Malka ka raja, or andar bhi Malka ka raja, because India was under the British, it was a British colony at that time. So exactly as you're saying.
So they were, he was very kind, and even our current Hazur, and when Hazur had come to Calgary, I'd seen that, he would walk behind his wife, and he made sure that, she was okay, and he took her upstairs to the elevator and stuff. So that was something which was a lesson for us, that this is how you're supposed to treat your spouse, with respect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think even in one of the missionaries meetings in one of the countries, Hazur mentioned that, the missionaries, they're supposed to serve even each weekend. And he said that, each month you have 1 weekend off. And he said that even that is for your wife and your children, that you're supposed to take them somewhere. So this is what we learn, from these people who understand the teaching of Islam best, that this is what they exhibited. This is through their personal example. They're leading us. It's not that they're telling us to do something which we are not doing. Rather, they are teaching us through their own example. But Rizwan Sahab, we have spoken about treatment of the spouses, but if you can briefly tell us the children, what kind of treatment should we have for the children, for their upbringing, so that they can have a good life?
I think the children, they should be treated with kindness, compassion. Usually we have this thing, the way we grow up, we always put that fear of God in them, in the sense that we say that if you do this, Allah will get mad. But I have a feeling that instead of that, we can also say, if you do this, Allah will be happy. So we should have that, that we should instill that the love of Allah Ta'ala in our children, and we should treat them in the sense that we are friends with them. They can come to us, they can tell us about anything that they have, any problems that they have, any difficulties that they face. So the parent should be someone who is a friend to the child, and the child can come up to them anytime and talk to them about any problems that they have. But we find that today, many times, instead of going to the parent, they would rather go to a friend. They would rather go to some other person besides the parent, outside. So this causes problems because it causes a lot of a break within the family, and that's harmful for the family as well.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly as what you mentioned. Hazur has been highlighting this as well, that the parents, especially the fathers, they need to have a friendly relationship with their children. And we find this, in the life of the promised Messiah ﷺ as well, that he had a very friendly relationship with his children, and he was always there, worried about their upbringing. And the thing he said was that it's very interesting that he said that the most important thing regarding the upbringing of the children is prayer, the weapon of prayer. And we discussed this in one of our other episodes as well. And he said that those parents who sometimes try to either, by force get their children to do something, he said that it's a form of shirk, associating, partners with God. Because you would think that by physically abusing them or, hitting them, you can mold them into a certain thing. So he said that the real thing should be that you're telling your children every now and then that this should be like this or this should be like that. But the most important weapon is prayer. And also in one incident, Hazur mentioned it's regarding Hazrat Masih Sani, that when he was a child in school, they were discussing whether knowledge is better or wealth. And we hear that and we read that incident that particular night when they were sitting down having food, Hazrat Muslim, he told one of the brothers, because he was shy, that ask the promised Messiah, Abba, is ilm zyada acha ya daulat? And the promised Messiah right away he said that Toba karo, ना इल्म अच्छा है ना दौलत. Allah Ta'ala ka fazal acha hai, that it is the blessing, the grace of Allah Ta'ala. So this is something the parents have to instill in their children, and it is from their own example. If we're not presenting a good example, then it is difficult that we expect our children to do something else. And Jazakallah for joining me for this discussion today. We have been discussing different topics from the essence of Islam. It is a 5-volume series which has extracts of the promised Messiah ﷺ under different headings. Prayer, the high status of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, marriage and progeny, which we discussed today, and many other topics. So we encourage our viewers, especially the younger viewers, that whatever topic you're interested in, pick up a volume, find that topic, and read a few pages. And it will enlighten you. It will show you the true teachings of Islam. Sometimes we're afraid of having a discussion with people because we don't understand the true teachings of Islam. So this is our weapon. If we are able to read this book, if we are able to understand the concept of Islam, then we can convey that concept to others. And similarly, we'll be able to defend the teachings of Islam, that why I am following this religion and this beautiful religion. So with that, we finish our program today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
आओ लोगों के ये नूर खुदा पाओगे, लो तुम्हें तौर तसल्ली का बताया